Masechet Ketubot, Daf Sadi Hayet. We're talking about a widow and orphans. When a husband dies, the widow is owed mizonot. She gets to collect food for a while until she collects her ketubah as a one-time payment. Once she collects her ketubah, then she no longer receives food. Now, the woman has a right to go and seize land and either keep the land or sell the land and take the money in payment for both her sustenance and for the ketubah payment. So we start with a story. Ha'i'iteta detavsa kasa dechaspa bichtuvata. So a woman, she sees not land but actually a silver cup as partial payment for her ketubah. And then she came to the orphan and says, I want you to feed me mizonot. So they came to Rava, and the orphans were claiming, hey, she already started collecting her ketubah, so we don't have to give her mizonot anymore. And she was claiming, no, I didn't get my full ketubah payment yet, so therefore you still have to feed me. So Rava said, Amar lu le'atmeh, zilu havu la mizonot. He told the orphans, you have to still give her mizonot, because le'techash leha de Rabbi Shimon, tamar lo amrinan miksat kesef kechol kesef. He said, because we do not concern ourselves with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. He's the one that said that a partial debt is not like a full debt. When someone owes part of it, the orphans owe only a part of the ketubah, it's like they owe none of the ketubah, and that's it. It's like the ketubah is paid. We don't follow that opinion. Instead, we follow the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who said that a partial debt is like a full debt. Even though they already paid part of the ketubah is still somewhat still outstanding, and so we consider it the same as if the payment of the ketubah has not been paid at all. And therefore, she has a right to receive ketubah. She has a right to receive mizonot. And so even though she collected the partial payment for her ketubah, you still have to give her mizonot. Okay, so this is an important story to know that we do not follow halacha like Rabbi Shimon. Next, Shalach le Rabba bered Rava le Rav Yosef. Mocheret shelo betin siricha shibuah or en siricha shibuah. A woman comes and she wants to take land and sell it, take land from the orphans, from the estate that she has a right to. She has a lien on the land to pay for her ketubah or to pay for her mizonot, and she wants to sell it without betin. So she has a right to do that. The question is, does she have to make a vow first or not? Usually, when someone collects money, collects anything from orphans, they have to make a vow that they were not paid already, that they actually are owed all this money in full, that the land that they take, they're going to sell it at the right price and not cheat the orphans in any way. Now, does this apply to the widow as well, since she has a lien on it and the orphans owe her this money? That's the question. So we answer by asking yet another question. Rav Yosef says, why are you asking about a shivua? Why don't you ask a more basic question of, do you have to make an announcement? Generally, when a bet din sells land of orphans, they have to make a public announcement 30 days, like a public auction, to make sure that they're getting the best price possible on behalf of the orphans. So that's a basic thing that even a bet din has to do. So before you ask about making a vow, why don't you ask about whether the wife has to, the widow has to make a public announcement? So he answered, I didn't ask that. I didn't ask that question because I already know the answer to that. Amar le Hachraza la kami ba'yali. Damar bizera amar Rab Nachman. Almana sheshama le'atzma lo asta ve'lo chilum. I know the answer based on a statement that Rabbi Zera said. Now, it's going to be an indirect inference from this, as we'll see in a second. He said that a widow who makes her own assessment, she doesn't get outside assessors to see how much the land is that she's collecting from the orphans. She makes her own assessment. She has done nothing. It's an invalid seizure because she can't just make up any number. Now, what case exactly are we talking about? If she made a public announcement, then why would you say that's nothing? Making a public announcement, everybody's going to come and bid on it. So that sounds like it should be a valid procedure, and it should be a valid sale. So it must be that they're talking about when she did not make a public announcement. And when it says that it's not the transaction is invalid. It's talking about a case where she seizes the land for herself, she keeps it. That meaning a case where she is owed whatever number it is. She says, I'm going to take this land, and let me see, I think this land is worth 1,000. Meanwhile, it might actually go for 2,000, and so she's underestimating the land, and now she's getting more than she should. So that's why, in that case, because she did not make a public announcement, and she made her own assessment. So that's invalid. The orphans can come and say, "We take that. We want to take it back. It's not yours." But we can infer from the statement that hala'acher mashasta asta. But if she seized the land and sold it to someone else based on her own assessment, even without a public announcement, then that is valid, because in that case she's not personally going to benefit from a false assessment. In fact, in that case, since she's keeping the money, it would be in her interest to get as much money as possible, so that she could pay herself more of whatever she's owed, and not have to go and get another piece of land. And so in that case, she can make her own assessment, and she need not make any public announcement. So we see from this case, from the fact that Bizera says that when she makes her own assessment, that is invalid. We can infer that it's only invalid in a case where she keeps the money herself and she made no announcement. But if she sells the land, even with no announcement, it's valid. So we learn from here that, in fact, you do not need a public announcement. So Rabba says, that's why I asked about a shivua. I already know the answer about a public announcement is not needed. Okay, this is going to be our conclusion, but first we challenge this inference. Can you really infer that from the statement of Rabbi Zera? I can interpret it otherwise. Le'olam da'achruz. Maybe, in fact, talking about a case where she did make a public announcement, and nevertheless, we say it's an invalid transaction. Why? Man sham lich. It will be a case where the orphans will come and say, who assessed this for you? The meaning, as we're going to see in a second in the following story, means who gave you the right to take it? You didn't take it in an official procedure. Here's the story. A certain man had deposited some coral, some expensive item belonging to orphans. He deposited it with someone. Azal shamaha lenafshe barba me'a zuzeh. That person who was watching it, he actually was owed money by the orphans. And so he said, you know what? And I know I'm watching it for them. I'm just going to keep it. This expensive item. And he made his own assessment. It seems to me to be worth 400 zuz, and maybe that was a proper assessment. Nevertheless, ayakad, in the meantime, it went up in value, these coral. Kam beshit me'ah, and now it became worth 600. So, atale kameh did it be ameh, the case came before to be ameh, because the orphan said, that's worth 600, and he took it in payment for 400. Give us the coral back and we'll give you 400. He says, no, I made my assessment at 400, and so now it went up in price, I get to keep them. That was the argument. Amar le man sham lach. Rabbi Ameh said to the one who was watching it, who had the coral in his hands, he said, who assessed this for you? Right? In other words, you didn't go through a proper procedure. You just decided, I'm going to keep this. And so therefore, you cannot take it. And so, therefore, we can say the same argument up here. Even if she did make a public announcement, the orphans may still have a right to come and say, yeah, but who gave you the right to go and make a public announcement and take it? You didn't go through a proper procedure, either of a bet din or of making an official evaluation of it. And so maybe in fact they did make a public announcement, but still the orphans can get it back. So this is not a good proof. In the end, we say so instead, you don't need a public announcement. In other words, this inference from Rabbi Zera's statement is good. And even though we actually did not have any discussion, we got diverted about asking whether you need a shivua or not. His answer was never never answered. But the halacha is that, yes, she does have to make a vow. The widow has to make a vow in order to take to seize the land, but she doesn't have to go through the public announcement procedure. All right, and now we get to the next Mishnah. Almana שהייתה כתובתה 200, ומכרה שווה מנה ב-200. So the first clause here is going to be very interesting. You have the widow. She is owed 200 zuz for her ketubah, and she goes and seizes a piece of land. She has a lien on it, so she's taking what's hers, but she wants the cash, and so she takes the piece of land that actually is worth 100 on the market. But she's really good at real estate, and she's able to find a buyer for 200, some sucker. And so now she has 200. The halachaz nitkabla ketubata. She gets her full ketubah, even though the orphans only gave up a piece of land worth 100, and she, was able to sell it for double its worth. That's her payment. She can't go and say, and give me another piece of land, because just because I did a good job. No, that profit, that increase, is for the benefit of the orphan. So she's done. Now the opposite case, o shaveh 200 b'maneh. Let's say she goes and possesses a piece of land that's actually worth 200, but she's a really bad real estate agent, and she sells it too quickly for 100. She now loses out, and it says she received her ketubah because she took land that was worth 200. That's it. She took what's hers, and even though she was a bad salesperson and only got 100 for it, the orphans say, you took the land that's worth 200. Now, this seems to be unfair for the widow because, on the one hand, she does not benefit from the extra profit that she got by being a good salesman, and she incurs a loss if she is a bad salesman. So it should be either that she should always get it should always be based on the amount of the land, and she should get 200 of land, and then if she sells it for more, she keeps the profit. If she sells it for less, she suffers. Or it should be the bottom line, whatever she sells it for, and the risk is for the orphans, one way or another. But this seems to be a contradiction. The Gemara is going to ask about it. Next clause, in this scenario, her ketubah is only worth 100. She goes and seizes a piece of land that's worth 101. And she sells it, and she now has 101. She pays herself 100. She has one left over. This is invalid because she seized too much land. This is different from the case here where she seized the land that's worth 200 and she was owed 200. That seizure is a valid seizure. Here, she took more land than she was entitled to. And even though, actually, in this case, she sold it for 100. So she took land worth 101. She only got 100 for it, but it's still invalid because she seized more land than she was entitled to. Even if she says, listen, I took the land that's worth 101, I got 100 for it, but you know what? I'm willing to give you the extra dinar that you're out, so that the orphans will be whole. They lost a piece of land worth 101. They only owed 100, and now she gives them one coin. And so she'll only receive 99 in the end. But shouldn't that be good? The answer is no, because still the orphans have a right to have that land. And you can't just go take someone's land illegally and sell it, even if you give them the money for it. No, that's not. She's not authorized to take the land. We're going to see the Gemara is going to treat the widow kind of like an agent, a shaliach, and so this sale is invalid because the orphans authorize her. She is authorized only to sell the land up to and equal to her ketubah, and not even $1 more. However, that's Tanakama. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel omer, לעולם מכרה קיים, עד שתהיה שם כדי שתשייר בשדה בת 9 קבין, ובגינה בת חצי קב, וכדברי רבי עקיבא בית רובע. Rashbag says, no, if it's only 1 dinar more, then the sale is still valid, because that's a tiny piece of land. You can't even plant anything on a piece of land worth 1 dinar. So she took a little extra. It's still fine. And the only time it'll be invalid is if she takes so much land more than she's owed that would be enough to plant 9 kav of grain. 9 kav of grain is considered the minimal amount of land that you would that you would plant grain in. Right? If you have a little backyard with a small area, it's not worth your time and effort to go in and grow wheat there. 9 kav then is already something that is sufficient. So if the widow sells land that is 100 dinar plus 9 kabin worth of land, then she's really taking too much, and the whole thing is void. But less than that, it's just a rounding error. Ubagina, if it's a garden, a vegetable garden, hatzikav, because vegetables are more expensive than wheat, and so for vegetables, it's worth planting vegetables even in a half of a kav. Rabbi Akiva says even in a quarter of a kav, meaning land that would produce a quarter kav of seed, is worth planting vegetables, and so in that case, the sale, if it's less than that, the sale would be valid. Last case is if she's owed 400 zuz. And she sells 4 different pieces of land. The first one is worth 100, she sells it for 100. Second is worth 100, she sells it for 100. But the last one is worth 101, and she sells it only for 100. The last one is an invalid sale. Once again, according to Tanakama, she sold more land than she was entitled to. But the first 3, they are valid sales because those were still under the threshold. So in fact, even if the first sales were more than the threshold, she sold 101 worth of if the order was different, if she sold the first sale was 101 worth of land and she sold it for 100, that would be valid because she still is owed more, so she has a right to take that land. And the second and the third piece of land, so that would be altogether she sees 303 dinar worth of land, that's fine, she's still entitled to it. It's only the last one, if she goes over, then the last one only is invalid because that last seizure was more than the amount that she is permitted to take. All right, that's the Mishnah. The question: Mai shana shaveh 200 b'maneh damri la at afsadet shaveh maneh b'200 name tema ana arvachna. What's in the first clause of the Mishnah? What's the difference between when it's worth 200 and she sells it only for 100, and we tell the widow, sorry, you lost out, you're a bad salesperson, and you only got 100, but they often say, we gave you the 200, so she loses out. But in the opposite case, when she seizes land that's only worth 100, so really she has a right to go and take another piece of land worth another 100. So because she was a good salesperson and she got 200 out of, sold it for 200, how come she doesn't say, just like I would lose if I sold it for less, I should profit if I sold it for more? How come we don't tell her that and we say, oh, you got your 200, that's it, you don't get any more land? Doesn't seem fair. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba bar Abu, Kan Shana Rabbi, Hakol Lebaal Hamaot. So the answer is that we're following the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who taught regarding a case like this that everything goes to the owner of the money, meaning the sender. We're considering the orphans like a sender. They own the merchandise, and they're appointing an agent. The widow is like an agent that's doing the selling for the orphans. Really, the orphans, since they're in possession of the land, it would be their prerogative to sell the land and give her cash. But now they're not doing that, so she has a right to act as their messenger. So what happens in general if a messenger goes ahead, right? I tell a messenger, right, and go and sell this merchandise. It's worth $100 and $100, and go sell it for 100. If the messenger comes back and is able to get more from it, 110. So who gets to keep the profit? The messenger or the sender? That's what we're talking about, and we're going to see that according to Rabbi's opinion. Rabbi is saying here that it would be the sender who gets to keep the profit, and that's why the orphans also get to keep any profit. It's their money after all that the agent is just using. Okay, here's how we see it. Kedatanya, Osifu lo achat yetera, hakol la shaliach. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yehuda, that's not the opinion that we're going to follow here, says that if the agent comes and is able to get some more, then the benefit goes to the agent, right? Maybe the seller, really likes the agent, and he's buying some cupcakes. He's buying a dozen cupcakes, and he puts an extra one. So he means to give it as a gift to the agent, so the agent can eat it, and he only has to deliver 12. That's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Rabbi Yosef Omed Holkin. Rabbi Yosef says they split it. They got an extra cupcake, split it in the half, and the messenger gets half, the sender gets half. However, we have a contradiction within Rabbi Yosef. Hatanya Rabbi Yosef Omed Hakol Bal Hamaot. Rabbi Yosef also says that the sender gets everything. So which one is it? אמר רמי בר חמא לקשיא, כאן בדבר שיש לו קצבה, כאן בדבר שאין לו קצבה. It depends what kind of thing it is. If it's an item that has a fixed price, like cupcakes, or like if you're buying a flour and it goes by weight, it's a definite fixed price. In that case, if the seller adds something, it's clear that that's a gift, because it was a fixed price. It comes out to $10. They're giving you more. It's clear that the seller wants to give something extra. We just don't know, does he mean to give the extra to the messenger or to the seller? Since it's not clear, that's the cholkin. That's this braita above that says they split it. But if it's something that does not have a definite price, like land, where it's variable, it could go for a little more, it could go for a little less. In that case, it's not clear that the seller meant this as a gift, but rather this is part of the price that he is willing to pay, and therefore that added money, that profit goes to the owner, right? The owner got a good deal. And so the agent has no right to keep it. It has to go to the owner, and that is the opinion that we are following in this case as well, that the widow is acting as a messenger. So same thing. If a messenger does a really bad job and sells some merchandise worth 100 for 50, the seller can say, you did a terrible job. You have to pay the difference. Like a cashier that gives out too much change, they're going to have to pay from their paycheck. But on the upside, a messenger who gets more, well, then we assume that the seller wanted to pay this higher price for the item, and so the seller gets it because he's lucky, he got a good price. The messenger does not get it. So she is a messenger, and we apply the same law. Papa decides the halacha in accordance with what Rami Bar Chama already said, that if it's something that has a set amount, then it's clear it's a gift by the seller. Who gets the gift? We're not sure, so they split it. If it's something that does not have a set amount, that is not clear that it's a gift, so maybe it's just profit that he was willing to pay for the merchandise itself, and therefore it goes to the owner, the one that sent the sender. My kamashmalan, why does Rabbi have to say this? Didn't Rabbi Bar Chama already say it? The answer is shinuya deshanenan shinuyahu. The answer that we taught is a correct answer, as opposed to just a theoretical answer. This is very important because it shows that sometimes when the Gemara, Rabbi Bar Chama or anyone else, says, "Oh, this is talking about a case of A. This is talking about a case on B. This was Monday. This was Tuesday." Sometimes they're proposing that just to try their best to resolve contradictory sources, contradictory baraitot. But they don't actually mean that they know for sure that that's really the meaning. They're just trying out. Here's a possible interpretation. And so it doesn't mean it's actually the halacha. So Papa is confirming that this thing that is a possible interpretation and does resolve the baraita is in fact the correct interpretation. And we can even follow it halacha l'maaseh. Next question. So this is continuing on the question of a sender and a messenger. If the messenger does not fulfill exactly what the sender asked him to, then is it considered a sender or not? A messenger or not? So here's the application. Someone said to an agent, "Go and sell half of a cord on my behalf." Okay, so I own a lot of land. I only want to sell a portion of it, half a cord worth of land. So then the agent is only authorized to sell that much. If they go and sell double the amount, an entire cord, without my knowledge, so how do we consider this case, Mai? On the one hand, we could say, Mosif al devaravu v'litcha mihakaneh. The agent added to my words. So he fulfilled my words. He sold half a cord. That half a cord that he sold is a valid sale because I authorized it. But the other half that he sold without my authorization, that's invalid, right? If someone just goes without my authorization and sells my house, right? That's not a valid sale. I didn't appoint them. So the buyer has to go make sure that it was actually this messenger is authorized by me. This is my lawyer. Someone just decides they're going to be my lawyer and sell my house. Doesn't work. So in this case, since I did authorize half is valid. I didn't authorize the other half is not valid. Do we say that? Or do we say that this messenger, this agent, disregarded my words, and therefore the entire sale is invalid? I said half a cord. He said he did a whole cord. A half a cord is not the same as a whole cord, and therefore the entire thing is invalid. So that's the question. Is what he did included? He did more than what I said. So is my messengership included in what he did, and therefore that part of it is valid? Or once you change something, then he's acting on his own completely, and the whole thing is invalid, is the question. It does apply to our Mishnah because, she sold 101 or 100 plus when she was only authorized to sell 100, so that would be the same question. Is the 100 part of the sale valid and just not the extra one, or is the entire thing invalid? So let's see how we answer it. Amar Rav Yaakov min harpekot mishmei de Ravina tashema. Amar Baal habayit lishlucho ten lahen haticha leorchin, vehu omer tilu shetayim, vehen natlu shalosh kulan ma'alu. Okay, we have a fun case of a host. He has some meat there, and he tells the agent, a waiter that he hired there, go and give the guests one piece of meat, right? I want to give them one piece. Now, the agent, will call him the waiter, he takes two pieces. He comes to the guest and says, take two pieces. So now the agent added one more than the host authorized. But then the guests on their own, they went and took 3 pieces. Okay, now it turns out that this meat was actually a korban, and they weren't allowed to take it. And anyone who takes from a korban commits me'ilah. If also the host offered it, gave it, he commits me'ilah. If he authorized an agent to give it to someone, then the host violates me'ilah. If the agent acts on his own, then the agent commits me'ilah. And the halacha here is that all 3 commit me'ilah. The one I sent, I authorized, take one, so I violate. The agent added one on his own, so he violates, and the guest took an extra one that they weren't entitled to. So now we have 3 me'ilahs. Now let's analyze. So if we say in general that an agent that does more than what I said, then the messengership is valid, and the extra part is not valid, then mishum hachi ba'al habayit ma'al. That would make sense why the host does commit me'ilah, because even though the agent added to what I said, you could have said that I said 1, he did 2, so he changed it. Therefore, he's not acting on my behalf at all. But we don't say that. We say for the one piece, he is acting on my behalf, and so that's why the host is liable, and then the agent who adds is liable for the second one that he added. So that would make sense. If you say that if the agent changes the amount, even if he adds more, then it's changing the instruction, and therefore he's not acting at all on behalf of the host, even for the base amount. Then why would the host be liable? Here's the basic principle in the Mishnah and Me'ilah, that if the agent acts as an agent, and he fulfills what the host wanted properly, then it's the host that commits me'ilah. But if he does not do his agency, if he doesn't do the right job, then it's the agent that that commits me'ilah. And so it must be that for that first piece, we consider it as the host did authorize it, and that's why the host is liable. So we see that when the agent adds, he is adding, but the original amount is considered a valid messengership. So that seems to be a good proof. But we answer not necessarily. Telu achat midato shel bal habayit ve'achat midati ve'shaklu inhu telat. We could be talking about a case where the agent, the waiter, said explicitly to the guests, take one piece from my host. So he said, that is from my host. I'm acting as an agent for the one piece. But then he said, for the second piece, take with my consent. So no, he explicitly said that the second piece is not from the host, but rather he's giving it of himself, even though he may not have a right to give it. But because he said he separated them in his language, he made it clear that he's doing two separate things. One, he's acting as an agent. So since he did that, then surely he isn't acting as an agent for that first piece. The host is liable because the host actually sent him and he did what he said. The second piece, he said, no, separate thing. I want to offer you one from my with my consent. And so they did take that. So that's why the messenger is also liable. The third one, they took on their own. And so that's why all three parties here are liable. But we're not necessarily dealing with a case where the waiter said, take two, implying that both of them are from the host. If he did that, then maybe in fact we would say that he didn't do anything at all. It's void because he changed the parameters of what the messenger of what he was authorized to do. So therefore, there's no proof from here. The next proof is going to be from our Mishnah, but that's going to lead to a longer discussion, and we'll see that tomorrow. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.